There is a word in ancient Greek that has no perfect translation in English. The ancient Greeks used it to describe the highest possible condition of a human life, the state that every philosophy, every religion, every self-help book ever written has been trying to point at, often clumsily, usually incompletely, almost never with the precision that this one word carries. The word is Eudaimonia. It is usually translated as happiness, but happiness is wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. Happiness is a feeling, a weather system, something that arrives and departs, that depends on what happened this morning, that can be produced by a good meal or a warm conversation and undone by a difficult email. Eudaimonia is not a feeling. It is a condition, a state of being, the specific, demanding, deeply satisfying condition of a person who is living in full expression of what they are most deeply capable of being. Not a person who feels good, a person who is, whispered, genuinely, completely, sustainably good. Aristotle spent 20 years developing a philosophy of eudaimonia that is, in my view, the most useful, most honest, most practically applicable account of what a well-lived human life actually requires. And it begins with a question so simple it sounds almost naive. What is the good life? Not in theory, not in philosophy, not as an abstraction. For you, specifically, in the one life you actually have. Here is a pattern that visits almost everyone who has worked hard and achieved well and arrived somewhere in their 40s or 50s. You have done the things that were supposed to produce the good life. The career built carefully, the family tended faithfully, the milestones reached in roughly the right order, the house, the position, the accumulated evidence that you have been, by every external measure, successful. And yet, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the middle of an ordinary week, something surfaces. Not dramatic, not grief or crisis or the particular agony of acute loss. Something quieter, a hollowness, faint but persistent, like a note played in a register just below what you can quite hear. The sense that the life you are living, for all its evident accomplishment, is not quite the life you are. Aristotle would not be surprised. He would not diagnose this as ingratitude or depression or the midlife crisis that popular culture has made of it. He would say, with the calm precision of a man who had spent a lifetime observing how human beings actually work, rather than how they are supposed to work, that you have been optimizing for the wrong thing, that the culture gave you a map and you followed it faithfully, and it led you somewhere real, just not somewhere that matches the territory of your actual nature. And that the distance between where the map took you and where you actually needed to go, that is where the hollowness lives. Aristotle was born in 384 BC in Stagira in northern Greece. His father was the personal physician to the king of Macedon, which meant that from childhood, Aristotle was trained in the empirical observation of the natural world, in looking closely at things as they actually are, rather than as theory says they should be. At 17, he went to Athens and studied at Plato's academy for 20 years. He was Plato's most brilliant student and eventually his most significant critic. Because where Plato looked upward toward ideal forms, abstract truths, the eternal and unchanging realities behind the world of appearances, Aristotle looked around, at plants, at animals, at the specific, embodied, social, imperfect, mortal creatures that human beings actually are, at the way they actually live, actually choose, actually suffer, actually flourish. And from that close, patient, empirical observation, he built the most practically grounded philosophy of human flourishing that the ancient world produced. He eventually returned to Macedonia, tutored a young prince named Alexander, who would become Alexander the Great, and then came back to Athens to found his own school, the Lyceum. He talked while walking, his students following him through the covered walkways of the school, the peripatetics, the walkers. Even his teaching method was empirical, moving through the world rather than sitting above it, thinking with the body as well as the mind. The foundation of Aristotle's entire ethics, the bedrock on which everything else is built, is a single observation about human nature that is so obvious once stated that it is almost embarrassing that we need reminding of it. Every human being has a nature, a specific, particular, irreducible nature, and flourishing, eudaimonia, is what happens when a person lives in full expression of that nature. He called it the ergon, the characteristic function or activity of a thing. An eye's ergon is to see, a knife's ergon is to cut, a musician's ergon is to make music. And when each of these things does its ergon well, with excellence, with full expression of its capacity, it is, in Aristotle's language, functioning as it was made to function. It is good. The human ergon, the characteristic activity of a human being as distinct from every other kind of creature, is the exercise of reason, of thought, of the particular extraordinary capacity we have to reflect, to choose, to understand, to act deliberately rather than merely instinctively. And eudaimonia is what it feels like from the inside when you are doing this well, when you are living in full, active, excellent expression of what you most deeply are. Now, Aristotle is not saying that the good life is purely intellectual. He is not saying, become a philosopher and think beautiful thoughts and the rest will follow. He is saying something far more holistic and far more demanding than that. He is saying that the good life requires virtue, arete, the development of excellent character across every domain of your life, not just your work, your relationships, your relationship to your own emotions, your relationship to pleasure and pain and desire and fear, your relationship to the community you live in and the people who depend on you. Eudaimonia is not a feeling you have occasionally. It is a life you build, daily, deliberately, over the entire span of your adult years.
The concept in Aristotle's ethics that I want to stay with, because it is the one most urgently relevant to midlife, is what he called the doctrine of the mean. Aristotle believed that virtue is not an extreme, it is a balance, a calibrated middle point between two kinds of failure, excess on one side, deficiency on the other. Courage, for example, is the mean between cowardice, too little, and recklessness, too much. Generosity is the mean between miserliness and profligacy. Confidence is the mean between self-deprecation and arrogance. And crucially, the mean is not the same for every person. It is not a fixed point on an objective scale. It is relative to you, to your specific nature, your specific circumstances, your specific history and capacity, and the particular demands of the life you are living. What constitutes courage for someone facing their first public speaking engagement is not the same as what constitutes courage for someone navigating a medical diagnosis. What constitutes generosity for a person of modest means is not the same as for someone of great wealth. The task, Aristotle's actual task, the one he spent the Nicomachean Ethics laying out with extraordinary care, is the lifetime project of discovering your own mean, learning, through practice and reflection and honest attention to how your choices actually land in your life, where your balance point is, and then living there, deliberately, every day. There is one more piece of Aristotle's philosophy that I think belongs at the center of any honest conversation about midlife. He believed, and he argued for this with the force of an empiricist who had actually observed how human beings live, that eudaimonia is not achievable alone. We are, in his phrase, political animals, zoon politikon, creatures constituted by nature to live in community, in relationship,
in the ongoing, reciprocal, demanding, irreplaceable engagement with other people. And friendship, Philia, he considered one of the highest and most necessary goods available to a human life. Not instrumental friendship, the kind where people are useful to each other, not pleasure friendship, the kind built on good times that dissolves when the good times end. Virtue friendship, the rarest and most sustaining kind, where two people admire what is genuinely admirable in each other, where each person is committed to the other's actual flourishing, and where the relationship itself becomes, over time, through shared difficulty and shared discovery, one of the primary structures through which both people become more fully themselves. Aristotle said that a person with this kind of friendship in their life has something that all the wealth and reputation and achievement in the world cannot substitute for. And a person without it, regardless of everything else they have accumulated, is missing something that goes all the way down. How many people in your life right now know who you actually are? Not the role you perform, not the version assembled for professional purposes, but the specific, complicated, still becoming person underneath all of that. Aristotle would say that number is the most important number in your life, more important than your net worth or your title or any metric the culture has offered you for measuring a life well spent.
Here is what Aristotle asks of you, practically, today. First, identify your ergon. Not your job, not your role, your characteristic activity, the thing that, when you are doing it, produces the particular quality of engaged, absorbed, fully alive attention that Aristotle called energia, being at work, the experience of a capacity fully expressed. It may be the work you are paid for. It may be something you do in the margins of the life the world sees. It may be something you have not yet given yourself permission to take seriously. Write it down as specifically as you can, not, "I love being creative." What form does that creativity take when it is most fully itself? Not, "I love helping people." In what specific context, with what specific kind of help do you feel most genuinely useful? The more specific the description, the more useful it becomes as a compass. Aristotle was an empiricist. He would insist on the particular over the general every time. Second, conduct an Aristotelian life audit. Take the major domains of your life: work, relationships, health, community, inner life, and for each one, ask where you currently sit on Aristotle's spectrum. Where are you in excess, doing or giving or performing more than your nature actually requires, more than is sustainable, more than serves your genuine flourishing? Where are you in deficiency, holding back, underinvesting, living below the level of your actual capacity? And where, in which domain, in which relationship, in which dimension of your daily life are you closest to your own mean? Closest to the particular calibrated balance that allows you to function as you were made to function. The audit is not about judgment. It is Aristotle's empiricism applied to the only subject that matters most, the specific shape of your one, actual, unrepeatable life. Third, invest in one virtue friendship. Identify the person in your life, or the person you have been meaning to reach toward, with whom a virtue friendship is possible. Someone who challenges you to be more fully yourself. Someone whose own becoming you are genuinely invested in. Someone with whom the conversation goes somewhere real. And invest deliberately, not in grand gestures, in the slow, consistent, patient accumulation of honest presence, the question asked with genuine curiosity, the difficult things said with genuine care, the willingness to be known rather than merely liked. Aristotle spent 20 years in Plato's company. The friendship shaped both of them in ways that neither could have achieved alone. You have time, not infinite time, but time.
Fourth, practice one virtue deliberately this week. Choose one quality of character that you know is underdeveloped in you, not a skill, a virtue, patience, honesty in a specific relationship, generosity with your attention rather than your money, the particular courage that your life is currently asking of you, and practice it. Not perfectly. Aristotle was clear that virtue is developed through practice, through the accumulation of chosen actions, through the slow, imperfect, deeply worthwhile process of becoming, by repetition, the person you are trying to be. We become just by doing just acts, courageous by doing courageous acts, generous by doing generous acts. We become by choosing again and again and again. I want to close with an image of Aristotle that I find unexpectedly moving. He is at the end of his life, 62 years old, in exile from Athens after Alexander the Great's death made his presence there politically dangerous. He is in Chalcis, on the island of Euboea. He will die there within the year. And he writes a letter, one of the few personal documents that has survived, in which he says simply that he is tired of philosophy being treated as something separate from life, tired of the idea that wisdom lives in abstract argument rather than in the actual, daily, embodied practice of living well. He had spent his entire career arguing with the patience and the rigor and the empirical precision of a man who had looked very closely at very many things, that the good life is not an idea. It is an activity, a practice, a daily, chosen, deliberately cultivated way of being in the world that produces, over time, not as a reward at the end, but as its own ongoing texture, the deep, sustaining, irreplaceable sense of being fully, excellently, actually alive. That is eudaimonia, not a destination, a direction. And you can turn toward it, not tomorrow, not when the conditions are better, not when the life you are living more closely resembles the life you imagined, but now, in this life, with these specific circumstances, from exactly where you are. Here is the question Aristotle would ask you today, not gently, empirically, with the clear-eyed curiosity of a man who actually wanted to know. In which part of your life are you living closest to the full expression of what you are most deeply capable of being? And in which part are you living furthest away? Leave that in the comments, because that answer, your honest, specific, Aristotelian answer, is not a small thing. It is the map. And the map, finally looked at with clear eyes, is the beginning of the journey. I'll see you in the next one.